Thank you for tuning in today. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and I'm your host, Daniel Davis. A family that decided to spend one full year, that's right, 1 year in South America. We're going to be talking about what their adventures are and what they were doing and what it takes to be able to plan for a vacation like this, especially an extensive one that goes up to 1 year. And joining us today on the Beyond 50 radio program is Robin Malinosky-Rummell and Christopher, and we'd like to thank you for joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Hi, Daniel. It's nice to talk to you. Thank you for inviting us.
Now, a lifestyle, when did you first decide, husband, let's not do the practical vacation to Florida or, some silly little place like that, and let's not just do it for 2 weeks, but what do you say we do it for an entire year? Were you just having a really good Pinot Noir when you came up with this idea?
Well, that certainly helps.
I'm sure it does when you think about a year.
Yeah, we have always really, really enjoyed traveling, and we did a lot of European vacations. In fact, we spent our honeymoon over there, and I ended up getting a position with a school district that after 5 years of working enabled me to take a year off of unpaid leave if I could explain to them what the relevance would be to doing this. And sure enough, I immediately, when I read that in my handbook, I thought, I've got to do this in 5 years. So I rushed home and I told my husband, and we had a 2-year-old at the time, Christopher, and he was unemployed. So he was kind of thinking, wow, this is a real pie-in-the-sky dream. But sure enough, he eventually did find employment, and we figured out how to sock some money away. And before we knew it, we were seriously considering South America.
Now, when you said that you had to sock money away, about how much were we looking at for this 1 year journey that you're about to embark on?
We actually include a budget at the end of our book, which really breaks that down. It turned out overall to be about $40,000. But to be honest with you, we ended up doing so well on our budget early in the trip that we managed to squeeze in some really exciting things like the Galapagos Islands, Carnival in Rio, and some other adventures in the rainforest in Suriname and Trinidad and Tobago at the end of the trip. So that $40,000, we could certainly have brought that down if we needed to.
I know what was interesting, as I was saying earlier in the program, is that I had the opportunity back in the mid-1980s to visit with South America. And I always thought to myself, if there was going to be a place that I would retire to, it would probably be South America just because of how well your money goes down there. I mean, it seems to go on forever almost. But, as I was reading in your book, Bring Your Own Children to South America here, it takes a lot of financial planning, even if it is just a $40,000 budget, to be able to take care of the unknown things, even though you think you've got everything planned out. As I was reading through the book, you can always find yourself stepping in mud puddles, so to speak.
Very true. That's very true.
Now, so what you also decided to do as well is rather than just, deciding to go down there, most people would think, well, if I'm going to go for a year, why not sell the home, and kind of give up the lifestyle for a while, maybe put things in storage. But you folks didn't decide to do that.
Well, and we, I have to emphasize, we have a really wonderful life here in Oregon. We both really enjoy our jobs. Christopher has a group of friends. He really enjoys his school and his community. He's very active in activities like acting, et cetera. So we were really interested in coming back and enjoying some semblance of this lifestyle. So you're right. That was the biggest piece of the planning, was really figuring out, because most people, obviously, if you sell your home and your car and you go totally unfettered, you don't have these worries back home. Now, I was fortunate enough to have my mom step up to the plate, and she did a lot of managing of just general bills and making sure that our accounts were paid and the taxes were paid and those kinds of things as we were on the road. So really, you kind of need to recruit at least one person at home to help you stay solvent at home with your properties, et cetera, if you need to do that.
Not to mention, she was also sort of a good behind-the-scenes field general for any emergencies that might arise as you were down in South America as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that we did when you were referring to mud puddles, one of the things that we did was we made sure to bring two different types of cards, ATM cards, one Cirrus and one Network. And with those two, we ended up just having travel accounts, so we kept our finances very low on those so that if something were to happen to them, if those accounts got drained, we still had the bulk of our money and assets in other bank accounts back here that my mother could oversee.
Yeah, I know. It was just like I said. It was interesting as I was saying to the audience here. What if you go down with an ATM card, then you discover that they only load these machines once a week? You're going to be into a little bit of trouble, So
absolutely.
There are a lot of those little hidden things that I was discovering as I was reading through the book. That, wow, I wouldn't have thought of something like that. So, what were some of the surprises as you were embarking on your journey down there for a year, where you thought, "Geez, we planned for everything, but we didn't expect this"?
Boy, that's a very good question. I think,
I like to give people a big idea that this isn't one of these pamphlets you pick up where you've got sunny beaches, that sometimes it's a little rougher than that, but, at least be prepared. So
absolutely. And, your reference to Brazil was a good one because, for example, my husband had to go to 4 ATMs, and we were somewhat forewarned before he could take out enough money for the weekend to get us through. We also, for example, what we tried to do was reserve an apartment in Rio for Carnival, and of course that was very difficult. It's so popular there, but relatively inexpensive. We didn't spend very much for the apartment for 10 days, but the trouble was getting the payment to them. So we went through all kinds of crazy shenanigans. We tried a cashier's check that we mailed from Argentina in U.S. dollars, but they wouldn't accept it because it didn't have cashier's check written across the top. And then we tried. We said, okay, well, we'll send you the money via bank account. So we'll transfer from our bank account to yours. So of course we had to finagle that with my mother. We were down in Puerto Williams at the end of the continent, the southernmost settlement of the continent, trying to contact my mother, trying to figure out, okay, where did that money go? Because even though they told her it'd only take a handful of days to get there, it took a couple of weeks. And so we were very anxious. Where did our money go? Do they have it? Do they not? Meanwhile, we're worried we're not going to have a place to stay when we get to Rio because we already had tickets, but no place to stay. So that was a little anxiety-provoking, but luckily it all worked out. And frankly, that company was very, very gracious in working with us around getting the money to them.
Now, you were also adamant, too, Robin, in your book, to be sure that you create a plan. In other words, sort of an itinerary, a little bit loose. Now, you're really a big planner, but you were explaining that your husband kind of likes to fly by the seat of his pants pretty much. So how did you strike a balance between the two of you?
Yes, that can be very difficult.
Because that sounds like such a guy thing.
I think it might be, but I am a big planner. I'm kind of our social planner at home, so I do a lot of planning. I read a lot, and a lot of the preparation that went into this was reading, talking to people. So I tried to plan for every eventuality. But like you referred to, my husband really likes to just kind of go with the flow, et cetera. And so what we had to do before we even left, before we even decided to some extent to be in South America for the year, was really sit down together as a team and say, what are our pacing options? What is our goals? What are we going to like to do once we're down there? And then whenever we got into an argument about what was going to be coming up next, we'd really refer back to that. And I learned to give him some time to really mull it over and make sure he was okay with it before I just plowed ahead, which is my usual MO.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I know, too, because you're bringing your son along, usually as adults we can go out and feel just a bit carefree, especially when it comes to our health or emergencies. Allegedly we're old enough and wise enough to know how to handle that. But when you're bringing your own child along, I'm sure that you must have had a little worry or maybe some fear about, well, what if something happens and we're in an area that something can't be done about it? I'm sure that was on your mind. How did you plan for things such as this?
You are exactly right about that. That, I think, especially with the focus in BYOC on family travel, it is a lot different than just the young, adventurous, gap year traveler, fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing. We really were concerned about Christopher's health, about stability for him. It was very important for him to have that predictability every day and to at least get some of his academics in. So it really did change kind of the nature of how we did things. We did a lot of very predictable types of things, like every morning when we settled into a place, we'd try to have that be our school time. Did a lot of description with him about what are we going to do, what's coming up during the day. And we also spent a lot of time ahead of time looking at what are going to be some child-friendly options. For example, we talk a lot about wine tasting. We very much enjoy wine tasting. Pinot Noir is right at the top of the list. But, how fun is that for a kid, right?
Sure.
So what we did was made sure at each of the wineries there was something that was going to be interesting to kids, be it a museum or an interesting tour, or even some space to kind of run around and do something. So we always tried to incorporate, now, how is this going to appeal to Christopher so he's not totally bored and he's getting something out of it too?
Yeah, and it's also neat because when you think about some of the classes that he could eliminate from school and actually really be well ahead of his own age and classmates is the fact that you're down in South America and, first of all, the diversity of which you could learn. You've got ecology going on down there. You're talking about geology, geography. I mean, you name it, the whole gamut of classes that could be made available to, children about your son's age would just, and you're down there for a year, there's just a tremendous amount to learn, and plus they would just feel so hungry to want to learn it because there it is, right at their fingertips firsthand.
Absolutely. And, in fact, before we left, we had found a really good workbook because we brought down several workbooks with us, which, in fact, once he was finished, we could pass along to people down there because they don't have those kinds of resources. So that was pretty neat for them. The workbook that we found was Exploring South America, and it actually had information in it on climate, for example, El Nino. It had information in it on the subsistence farming and the culture and what the landscape was like. So we literally could talk about the subsistence farming and that we're on the Altiplano and literally look out the window and point out that going on, which was really exciting for him. The other huge piece was animals. He discovered when he was down in South America that he really enjoyed animals. And one of the things that we did down there was we volunteered at a place called Inti Wariasi, and maybe Christopher would like to talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I guess. Okay, so Inti Wariasi is an organization where they get animals that have been maltreated, and then they release them to the try to release them to the wild. So it's a rehabilitation center. And so me and my mom, we worked with the turtles and birds and took care of them and cleaned their cages.
And so what kinds of things did you learn about that, Christopher? Did you learn something interesting about animals when you were down there?
Yeah, I learned a lot about just the diversity and different how the animals differ from the animals we have here.
It's interesting, too, Christopher. I think he's really trying to hold back from letting our audience know that the parents took a neat picture of Christopher posing with Pedro, which I believe is, a 5.5-foot South American caiman? I mean, what's next? You're going to let him ride on the back of a Nile crocodile? What's going on? We're really concerned about our kids' health, but we don't mind them posing with a flesh-eating animal like a caiman. Is that what you're trying to hold back from, Christopher? Because you could just let it out on the Beyond 50 program.
Not really, because it doesn't look like it, but in the photo I'm actually on a ledge.
Okay, because I thought you were swimming with them there for a minute. I was just trying to figure that out.
I know.
Did you wrestle with him too? Did you wrestle with him too?
No.
You didn't, huh?
I call that my bad parent picture because after that got produced, I looked at it and went, oh, my God, what was I thinking?
Yeah, we don't encourage to put your kids there, especially when you're looking at the world's largest rodent, to realize that the capybaras are also food for anacondas, which is another large animal. Did you see any of those, Christopher, while you were down there, the anaconda?
Yeah, we saw 4, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, did you get to cuddle with any of them, or?
No.
No cuddling, okay. I can appreciate that. So, Christopher, what did you think about going to South America when your mom and dad first talked to you about it? What crossed your mind when they said, hey, we're going to go down here for a year? What do you think about that?
Well, at first I was scared because I didn't really know how to speak Spanish all that much, and I was scared that I wouldn't have any friends for a whole year. But now I'm not all that scared because I know that it was really, really fun and that I learned a lot.
So, the worry of the large anaconda, the caiman, the jaguar, even the giant spiders, none of that bothered you, but, the fact that you might not have friends and you couldn't understand Spanish all that well really scared you.
Yeah.
Boy, you're braver than most people I know. That brings me to an interesting question, too, because, we are American and most of us don't even spend the time to learn another language. What was that like? Was that a real challenge, knowing that there'd be a lot of places that perhaps they just wouldn't understand English? Because I know in Brazil, an interesting experience that I had is that it sounds Spanish, and there is some Spanish, but it's mostly Portuguese. And I went out with a friend of mine who spoke very good. I mean, he was a Spaniard. There were times he was just standing there holding his hands in the air like, I really don't know what they're saying. I thought, oh, boy, But what was that like for you folks?
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right that in Brazil they do speak Portuguese. And the interesting thing was we had been coming into there from Argentina where there's a distinctive accent. And so I started speaking to them in Spanish with an Argentinian accent. And I could tell they understood everything that I said, and they really wanted to respond back. But the trouble was when they answered me, I had no idea what they were saying. so much for that plan. The rest of South America really, depending on how many tourists they have, their level of English is fairly good. And I do have to say, for the most part, as a gross generalization, most people went out of their way to be patient and friendly and try to communicate, even if it was a couple words or gestures. And our Spanish, because of that, continued to improve, and we did take some Spanish lessons too, so that we got to the point where we were fairly fluent by the time we had finished Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. But then, as I said, the trouble crossing into Argentina was that they had this whole different accent, and I was very embarrassed when I got there because the gentleman that I was trying to negotiate a room with went and found somebody that to translate for us, and I was looking at this woman thinking, oh my goodness, here's this other gringo. Is my Spanish that bad that I don't get it? Which, frankly, with the Argentinian accent, it kind of was. But the other thing was, later I talked to her and I found out she was born and raised in Argentina. She spoke both languages so fluently and looked very Western that I had my own bias about. I thought, well, she can't be Argentinian. Well, sure enough, she was. So.
Wow. Yeah, and what's interesting, too, even as I've discovered, and we shared this many times on the Beyond 50 radio program, is that, in a day of terrorism when people are feeling, the most threatened about security, should we be going, outside of the United States? And what I've discovered consistently on the program is I talk with folks such as yourself who go to places like South America, it could be Europe, even the Middle East. I've had the opportunity to have people like that on our program, is that they overwhelmingly say the most consistent thing is there really isn't a whole lot to worry about because, as you've just expressed, when you're in these other countries, people really go out of their way to make you feel at home, to make you feel comfortable. I mean, they want you there for the most part. And so, if anybody out there listening to the program thinks to themselves, I'd kind of like to pursue this, but I have, the idea of the threat of terrorism on my mind, you've certainly shared the fact that you just really didn't feel that kind of fear while you were down there, did you?
No, and I think, like you referred to your other callers, I really felt like we had done our research ahead of time. We talked to people. We did make some decisions. For example, we didn't go to Columbia because at that point we were worried about the safety. So we really tried, and we constantly asked people on the road. We asked the locals. We really felt like we did our research ahead of time, and for the most part, we felt very comfortable in most of the places, and we did end up in a couple of surprising places that we were concerned about, but overall, for the most part, we felt very comfortable. It's interesting because before we left, Argentina had the devaluation of their peso, and there were riots that were very highly publicized, and so family members of mine said, "Oh my gosh, you're not going to Argentina, are you?" And I said, "Well, I really think it's safe. We're going to go check it out. We'll make sure it's okay." And the funny thing is, when we crossed over into Argentina, the very gregarious people came up to us in a small town and were asking us lots of questions. And when we told the kids that we were from the United States, their eyes got real big and they went, "Oh my gosh, you're not from there. It's so dangerous."
Yeah, the United States, I can believe it.
Yeah, and they said, "My gosh, the Twin Towers." They talked about the media that they had seen, the movies. They really have, from the media, this perception of all of America as being very dangerous too. So,
hey, Christopher, I've got a question that's specifically for you. After being down in South America for a year, when you came back home, how did the way you see the world and the world that you live in now, did that change for you? And if it did, how did it change for you?
Well, my perspective on...
That's a big word. We don't use big words like that on our program. Okay, your perspective.
My perspective on Latinos changed a lot because I learned a lot about their culture and a lot about the different things they have to deal with.
Such as?
I can relate to them more.
Okay, what kind of things do they deal with that kind of change the way you view South American people? That's different from, say, you being in your own neighborhood.
Well, they're a third world country so they don't have as much money as us. Also, not all of their streets and stuff are safe. A lot of them are very dangerous. Mm-hmm. And so it would be hard for them to walk around and stuff.
And so you're feeling like it was dangerous in certain areas?
Not really, but
I can appreciate that. Well, tell me this, Christopher, what was it like to, be among the children of South America? I mean, were they happy? Did you play a lot of different games? I mean, what was that like for you?
It was pretty easy. Surprisingly, I thought even though we didn't really speak each other's languages, we could understand each other. And we played a lot of different things. We just played together.
You see, and that's why I've been advocating to our United States government, let the children run the United Nations. You don't even have to speak each other's language. You just get along and you play games. Mm-hmm. Now, did you bring any new clothes, or did you find yourself liking any of the South American fashions, shirts, pants, shoes, anything like that?
I think mostly we got new clothes.
When we were down there? We had to replace the shoes.
I will tell you that much. Going on down there.
There was a lot of walking around, so he certainly had to replace his shoes. Yeah.
Well, how about this, Christopher? I know this may be kind of a personal question for you, but was there a girl down there that you liked while you were down there for a year?
No.
No, nobody down there, huh? Yeah, those long-distance relationships are pretty difficult, even if you are down there for a year. Well, Now, tell us now, we haven't even really begun the adventure. We've mostly talked about, what it is to plan if you're going to take a year off, especially if you've got children that you're going to bring along, and, a lot of the good bullet points of why you should consider, traveling to a destination like South America. For one, it can be pretty inexpensive for the kind of experience that you can get for your money. But again, as you constantly have been hitting on and on, Robin, is that you want to be sure that you plan, and mainly planning for things that you don't think about. But now let's talk about the adventure. What was that like for you? Where did it all start? I believe it was in the northern part of South America. Is that correct?
That's right. We actually, in terms of trying to, number one, reduce how much it would cost to get down there and back, and also, number two, look at the weather patterns. We decided to start in the northern part of South America because it was their summer, and we knew as we worked our way south it would continue to be summer because it's in the southern hemisphere, and then we'd work our way back up. So weather was definitely a consideration, and then because the tickets in and out, we flew into Quito, Ecuador, and flew out of Caracas, Venezuela, and so those tickets were actually much cheaper than had we flown all the way down and started in the southern tip, for example. So
being careful to use travel agents is something you might urge some caution on then, just in case?
Yes, yes, and we actually found a fabulous one, which I refer to in the book, Éxito Travel, that specializes in South American travel, and so they were very good about looking into not only getting down there, but also the fact that we had to buy tickets a year apart, which a lot of people don't do. So they worked with us on that.
Now, also you consider, too, that it isn't just all about traveling and enjoying the landscape, but you're also, there's times where you've got to kind of fill the day with something to do, and you also talk about setting up to do maybe volunteer work while you're down there. I mean, why not stay busy, in a practical, patterned way, as you were talking about earlier in the program?
Absolutely. And, one of the really important things that we wanted Christopher, frankly, to get out of it and why we're encouraging other people to bring their own kids down there is because I think it's pretty easy in the United States to get caught up in the bigger, better, faster, more mentality. And we really wanted to kind of realign our priorities and look at the fact that really the only materialistic things we needed could fit in a backpack. So, that was a real emphasis for us. And so we ended up really wanting to spend some time getting to know the people, seeing what the culture was like, seeing what we could do to help, and getting something out of that, and also learning the language in the process. So we set up 3 different volunteer opportunities, one before we left, and then the other 2 we found as we were traveling down there.
Beautiful. Now, let's talk about the adventure and the people. Now, you started at the northern area of South America. What did you explore and discover as you were there in the summertime?
In the northern area, we were in Ecuador, Peru, and then working our way into Bolivia. And a lot of that area is Andean. So you have a lot of that rich native culture with the colorful handicrafts and the beautiful mountains to wander through. We also ended up doing quite a bit in Ecuador. Ecuador is one of the most diverse countries on the planet, in fact, for its size. And so not only do you get the Andean experience that a lot of people associate with South America, we also headed to the jungle. We befriended a gentleman through our volunteer organization, Alfonso, who actually was in a wheelchair. And so we got to see kind of how he negotiated his way around his country, which doesn't maybe have the same facilities that we do. And he brought us to the jungle, and we just absolutely fell in love with the lushness of it, the pristine and kind of otherworldly feeling that you get there, in addition to all of the range of wildlife, the birds calling and the monkeys howling and all of those things. So we ended up really seeking out the rainforest after that whenever we could, which we hadn't really intended to when we started the trip. So that was a huge passion we developed.
Isn't that kind of interesting how you can start with one thing in mind, and before you know it, it was a totally different world just captures you, and you realize this is like a bonus I would have never anticipated.
Absolutely. There's that piece of fear that you kind of have to work with and decide what works for you. But before we left, we got the malarial tablets, but we were worried about all the critters we might run into in the jungle and malaria and, a lot of different things like that. So that made us very concerned, of course. But then once we got down there, we took the malarial tablets. We didn't, fortunately, experience any side effects. When we were there, certainly when we started out in a guided experience where we were with people who were familiar with the rainforest, who could show us and talk to us about it, we actively sought out experiences after that in the rainforest. So yes, that really changed things. And we were really interested, too, in it because of Christopher's love for animals. As he referred to Intihuayasi, that was in the heart of the Bolivian rainforest, and so certainly not something we had considered ahead of time.
And Christopher, did you play with any monkeys? Kinda?
Yeah, during Ariasi, I was allowed to go down to the monkeys because one of the head person wanted me to see them. So I went down, and there was a mother monkey who couldn't have babies, so she thought I was her baby, and she started stroking me. But then another monkey came over, and he was playing with her, and he accidentally bit my arm.
Well, that's better than the caiman, I would think. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and our guest today is Robin Malinosky-Rummell and her son Christopher, and they're sharing with us the adventures of spending 1 year in South America along with their husband. Now, it's interesting. Now, you moved from the north and you started going south. Now, what areas did you decide or map out that you wanted to go and see and experience?
Well, we certainly wanted to go see the ruins in Peru, especially Machu Picchu. That's kind of a must-see on most travelers' agenda, and that was absolutely breathtaking. The ruins there are spectacular. And then we headed into Bolivia and wanted to experience the Salar, which is another really interesting place where basically it's a dried up ocean bed, so it's a salt land for acres and acres and acres. It's absolutely huge. As far as the eye can see, all you see is salt, with a handful of little, what they call islands still, sticking out of it that have cactus and some vizcacha, which are these teeny little rodents that look like rabbits, only they have very long tails, and some birds, and just a handful of things that can survive in such a barren landscape. And so that was an absolutely stunning place to see. We also saw Lake Titicaca in Bolivia as well, between the Peruvian and the Bolivian side, which is another place where they have islands. In fact, there's one area called the Floating Islands of Urus is the name of it, where they put down the indigenous reeds on top of the water and create islands out of this. And they use the reeds to build their houses and boats, and they even eat them.
Wow.
So it's fascinating to step on this very spongy material that's these people's home.
Now, did you get an opportunity to meet with indigenous tribes and maybe even observe any kind of ceremony whatsoever?
Now, in terms of observing a ceremony, I'm trying to think, and I don't think we exactly experienced that. We ended up connecting quite a bit with people that were a little bit more Western, but still certainly citizens of the country.
Sure.
And in fact, for example, like Alfonso that I was referring to in a wheelchair, he invited us into his home and took us to what they called a peña, which is a group of people getting together just by word of mouth, and there's a band. And so we were there dancing in the middle of his relatives and his friends, and he's trying to dance in the wheelchair with me, which was great fun, and just experiencing really a truly Ecuadorian experience. So we definitely had those different types of experiences as we went.
Yeah, I know that's the most fun that I remembered about Rio, is it just seemed to be a 24-hour-a-day celebration down there, and I thought, well, the whole country can't be like this. That's just too much going on right down there. Now,
absolutely.
Christopher, did you get a chance while you were in the Andes to do any llama riding at all, or?
Nah, I didn't get a chance to do any llama riding, but we did see a lot of llamas there.
Yeah, because those are like horses down there for them. Isn't that true?
Yeah, except mostly they don't ride them. They use them pretty much to carry, like, supplies.
Like Game Boys and things like that? Just in case, because I know one of the items you have here on your list is an absolute must-bring, especially with children, is a Game Boy. Something for them to do, a little bit of it pretty soon. But now with a llama the size of that, the only problem with bringing your Xbox is there's no place to plug it in now, is there? Now I see here that you were at Galapagos Island. Now, Christopher, that must have been like going back to like the Lost World or Jurassic Park for you. What was that like for you down there?
I thought it was really, really great because you can see animals everywhere.
Uh-huh. What kind of animals did you see there at the Galapagos Islands?
The iguanas at the pier trying to get algae off the rocks. And it looked like they were doing push-ups.
Push-ups?
Yeah.
So a good adventure to learn in South America from an animal is always exercise. Did you do any sit-ups next to the iguana, or you just pretty much said, I'll just leave it up to him?
Nah, we just left it to him.
And what other kinds of animals, how big were the iguanas that you seen down there?
Some were really small, but others were like maybe a meter long.
Yeah. So about 3.5 feet then.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big animal, isn't it? Did you want to take one home?
Nah.
The caiman stays, but the iguana's got to stay behind. I got you. Now, that's also a place for sea turtles, too, I understand.
Yeah, there are really, really big sea turtles, except some named Lonesome George is the last of the species. And so once he dies, and they're trying to get him to breed with other turtles, and so once he dies, that species of Galapagos turtle will be extinct.
And what species of turtle would be extinct once the one particular one dies, as you said?
It's a certain species of Galapagos turtle. So I guess there are several species of the bigger ones, and this particular line, he's the last of the line. And even though they've tried to breed him with other similar species, unfortunately, he's just not up for it.
Yeah, another like a cantankerous turtle on the Galapagos Island.
That's right.
Now, did you do any swimming with the iguanas or the turtles down there, Christopher?
Not really, but there were a lot of sea lions.
So you didn't swim with the sea lions then?
Yeah, I got to swim with the sea lions, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it was fabulous.
Speaking of which, because it is tropical, did you also take not just traveling landside, but did you do any scuba diving or snorkeling, anything like that?
We did do snorkeling.
Okay.
Yeah. But we didn't have, actually, when you're that young, you're not allowed to get a scuba diver's license. But we do have them now.
And did you do any fishing while you were down there, Christopher?
Nah, we're not really big fishers.
So you didn't catch any fish at all? Because there was a picture in here of somebody catching a piranha.
There you go.
Yeah, we did fish for piranha.
Oh, listen to him live it up now. Oh, piranha, well, that's different, It's one thing to catch a trout in the Northwest, but this was like a great white shark to me, So you caught a piranha then, did you?
I didn't catch one, but my dad did.
Yeah, he was the only one who had any luck, so that might have been why Christopher chose to forget that particular experience.
I see, yeah. Just couldn't fit
my husband somehow had the hang of it.
That's great. Now, were you allowed to stay up late too, Christopher, or did you have to get in bed at a reasonable time, even though this was a vacation?
It depended on what we had to do the next day. Sometimes I could, but sometimes I couldn't.
Oh, well, that's great. And how about the Amazon River? What was your experience with that?
Oh, the Amazon River is one of the places I thought that was the most interesting and unusual. all of the animals, the flora and fauna there are so different. In particular, we saw a lot of fish, obviously, because it's on the Amazon. And there was a museum that you could go to where they have the largest freshwater fish in the world that was absolutely huge, maybe at least 6 to 7 feet long. And when it opened its mouth, it literally could swallow a basketball.
Wow.
Huge. And managed to go to the fish market there and watch them cleaning all these unusual fish. And we also took a trip into the Amazon and saw some place called the Meeting of the Waters, where two different rivers come together and join to create the Amazon. But for a long stretch, they're two different colors. One is muddy and kind of murky, and the other one's very dark. And so it's really interesting to go and see how these two rivers come together eventually to form the Amazon.
Yeah, and I know that you talk, too, quite a bit in your book about diversity of South America. I mean, we're not just talking about tropical, but you can also see and experience glaciers.
Absolutely, and what's so interesting about that is that somebody who read my book said to me, wow, I didn't even realize there were glaciers in South America, because that's not kind of the image that so many of us conjure up when we first think of it. In Patagonia, Argentina and Chile combined, we saw huge, massive glaciers, and I've been to Alaska, and I've seen some glaciers, beautiful areas in Alaska, but the Perito Moreno Glacier down in Argentina just blew me away. Seeing calves come off that were as high as 20-story buildings and these large cracking noises that just rumbled underneath you. Absolutely phenomenal. And we also were able to see some penguins and some huge elephant seals fighting down there, and even a whale as we traveled through the Straits of Magellan. So absolutely incredible wilderness, and so much of it is unspoiled that it just feels very exotic and foreign to be literally where you're almost at the end of the world.
I know. It's quite fascinating, too, as I've done certain shows over the years where I've talked with people who were anthropologists and biologists, and, you know, they share the richness, just as you are with us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today, about the gold that really is South America, is its diversity, especially ecologically speaking. So when you come back to America, did you feel that it was like that sense of urgency, like, you know, we've got to stop some of the devastation that's going on down there, because this is life screaming at you in all of its glorious wonder and beauty, you know, and it kind of makes you, do you feel like a sense of advocacy in yourself now?
Absolutely. And, you know, that's one of the things where I'm really delighted to hear Christopher talk about things like Lonesome George, et cetera, where he really got to see, as we all did, the experience of how species are dying and how our planet is in some ways really struggling. And I think that's so important for us and for our next generation to experience that so they can advocate for that. Exactly. One of the really other interesting things we saw in the Galapagos was an area on Isla Rábida, one of the islands that you can take a boat to. There's some very beautiful landscaping there, and of course the sea lions and the boobies, et cetera, that you can see. One of the attractions as well is a lake that had these flamingos, and people would journey to the lake to see the flamingos. Well, they decided to help out the tourists by carving a path around the lake, and what that did was allowed the sea lions then to come from the ocean and cross through a little brush and the path to get to the lake. And so what happened is that they sullied the lake, and now the flamingos don't go there anymore.
Oh, that's crazy.
Even though there's a path there for the tourists, there's no storks for them to, or there's no flamingos for them to see.
That's amazing. When you think you're doing one good thing, you just finally affect a strand in the web, and you realize you've affected a bunch of things by just not thinking through what it is that you do. That's crazy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and that also in our experience at Intihuayasi, where we saw these animals that had been kept as pets and trapped, et cetera, really got a sense for how they're struggling and how their species are dying off because people are trying to use them and as pets or export them to people, et cetera. As well as up in Suriname, we were able to see the leatherback turtles, laying their eggs, and some conservation efforts that are going on there to make sure that that species survives as well.
Well, here was another interesting thing when you talk about people, pulling these animals out of South America, as you were saying, to make them into pets, exotic pets, is there was a gentleman in Oregon who actually runs a parrot sanctuary, and he's big about advocating, that parrots, especially macaw parrots, are not meant to be animals that you have as a pet. Mm-hmm. And he shows you basically this short documentary, and you realize these are very family-oriented birds as far as birds are concerned, not to, people. And you realize these things, they not only bond for life, but you see their community and how they are, and they're very entertaining in the wild to watch. And what was your experience? Did you have experience with, I'm sure you've probably seen parrots pretty much everywhere.
Mm-hmm. We did, but we ended up working specifically with the birds at Intihuayase, and I have to admit, before I went there, I was not particularly an animal lover. Christopher was more of the force behind us choosing to volunteer there, and once I was there, I experienced the same thing. I saw all of these animals as having very distinct little personalities, and very much fell in love with them, and that was after only 15 days. There was another parrot there, or a toucan there actually, that came, and unfortunately it was kept in a cage and could not move around in its cage, and so when it came, it was very, very unhappy and was snapping at all of us, and in fact, Christopher, you named him Draco Malfoy, after the villain in Harry Potter. But once we ended up, seeing him in a bigger cage, at least he was happier. But yeah, there's only so much life you can give a poor animal at that point, because they have had so much of their history and socialization experiences, et cetera, stripped away.
Oh, wow, that's just incredible to think about. Well, and that's the great opportunity, as you have a book such as this. We're talking with Robin Malinosky-Rummell, and the book is Bring Your Own Children to South America, and also joining us her son Christopher, sharing the delights and the experiences and the adventure of what it is to be in South America for a year now. We've talked a lot about the animals, some about the landscape, glaciers, but waterfalls are something pretty spectacular down there as well.
Absolutely. And Iguazu Falls apparently is rumored to have made Eleanor Roosevelt mutter, "Poor Niagara."
No, that big.
Because it really is huge and spectacular. And, I knew that I would really enjoy the waterfalls, but what I didn't really think through is all of the incredible, again, rainforest surrounding that. When you're looking at the waterfalls, there are birds, swifts, flying in and out of the water and playing. There are monkeys, and we saw, in fact, tarantulas kind of roaming around, and all kinds of different animals associated with that area, too. So coatis, in fact, when we were walking down a path, I had to jump off of the path because I was afraid of the coatis.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, the coatis kind of look like our raccoons, but with kind of a longer snout, and apparently if they're in a particularly ornery mood, they can bite, so I wasn't going to get too close to that.
I don't blame you. I also noticed a picture in your book of your husband holding, is that a baby jaguar?
That actually, I believe that picture is of a friend of ours, David, maybe, holding a baby puma.
Oh, a puma, okay. Because I was going to say, jaguars are pretty rare to find. I mean, you just don't find them anywhere, but...
Yeah, and that was another taken out of Intihuayase, that animal reserve that we were at, as David ended up taking care of this Roy, the baby puma, who, in fact, Christopher, you ended up having some experiences with Roy, too, didn't you?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, Roy just had this funny habit of attacking my boot for some reason. And he just loved to, maybe because he liked me, but he just loved to do it. And so every day when I'd walk in, he would just attack my boot.
Oh, brother. Nothing like playing with your puma in South America.
Exactly. What an experience, huh?
Absolutely. Oh, God. Waterfalls, the Amazon River, wild animals, it almost doesn't get any better than that. But then, let's bring in the human element of what South America is, because you could paint this marvelous picture, which is completely true, of just beautiful wildlife, your lush rainforests, waterfalls, waterways, you name it. But also there's a lot of, I guess, if you will, like sort of European standards of living down there as well that you were talking about in your book.
Absolutely. And, that's one of the things when people ask me, well, where would you recommend I go? And if they're kind of looking for, in fact, even maybe a somewhat European experience, Argentina is the place to go, because it has some incredible standard of living. 85% at least of the people there are descended from Europeans and of typically Italian descent, and the cities there are very beautiful, very high standard of living, clean, some colonial architecture that's mixed in with skyscrapers and very kind of bright nightlife. Of course, the excitement of the tango and that passionate experience. So there is a lot of ability to see some very European types of things when you're down there as well. And certainly given how the U.S. dollar is doing against the euro, my vote is for Argentina any day.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's what I've always encouraged people, because of my experience in South America, is it's just amazing just the value that you get down there. Why wouldn't you want to consider South America to be a vacation spot, or as you folks did, it was basically a life-changing experience for a year.
Absolutely. And in fact, in Argentina and Chile to some extent, and also Uruguay, north of Argentina, basically the price, we were getting 3-to-1 to the dollar. So everything, even though the standard was about what you get here, the price that you pay for here was divided by a third. So a really nice bottle of wine, $5. Really great steak, $2. It's just absolutely amazing.
I think the reason why I wanted to emphasize that is because it really feels good, at least if you get to do it once or twice in your life, to feel like you're living like a king. And in a way, you actually feel that way down there. The service, the way people treat you, the whole bit.
Exactly. In fact, at one point we stopped at a 5-star hotel spa in northern Argentina. We didn't know anything about it ahead of time, called up, found out it was $60 a night, and we were thinking, oh, well, maybe we'll try it for one night. If it's not worth it, we'll leave, because it felt like it was really out of our budget. And once we got there, it was so spectacular, with massages for $10 and mineral water baths for free along with the room, huge pool with jets and all kinds of bells and whistles, and the whole experience was $60 a night. Unbelievable.
Wow. Speaking of water, how was the water situation down there, drinkable-wise?
I had an experience in Venezuela actually before we went. We were down there for 2 weeks, where I ended up getting a Campylobacteria, and so I tend to be a little bit on the overcautious side when it comes to water. I absolutely didn't drink it. We found bottled water everywhere that we went, and we really never got ill from the water. Or from anything that we ate. I did end up with a couple of bacterial infections, but it was more driven by allergy issues than it was the food that we were eating or the water that we were drinking. So as long as you stick to bottled water, and I know that there are some parts where I was assured, for example, in Ushuaia, that the water was okay to drink, and the woman that I stayed with made me drink a glass of water, try to help me overcome my fear.
There you go.
But I figured better to be cautious, and we did not have any of those kinds of problems.
Yeah, see, that's the one thing you always go down there. It's a great place to visit, but don't drink the water, And so just these little stigmas that we could go into a place such as South America, like, for instance, terrorism, But then, as your son was describing, that back here, the way they see us down there, it's like, this is a scary country to go to. And it's neat to see books like this that come out, that can let people just kind of go in with their eyes wide open and realize, because of a fear that maybe somebody else has planted into, you're missing a tremendous, lively world of opportunity that you can come back and maybe help others to alleviate their own fears. And certainly, not going down there because you can't drink the water is kind of a silly fear, as you're saying, in some ways.
Absolutely, yeah. There is water, as I said. You can always accommodate for those kinds of things. So we were able to find bottled water wherever we went.
Yeah, that's great. Now, it sounds to me like the explosive sort of ending of your tour, and I could be way off because, you've experienced so much as you've shared with us here on the program today, but it seemed like Carnival would be like that last bastion of civilized partying. And, that's people from all over the world. I was down there in September, so I missed it, of course, by a couple of months, but what was the Carnival experience like for you and your family?
Well, it's interesting because Carnival in Rio has really kind of evolved into more of a showcase as opposed to a street event. They've built the Sambadrome, and in the Sambadrome, it's absolutely unbelievable revelry. You've got people just partying nonstop day and night, watching these floats that are unbelievable, where they're having to pick people off the floats with cherry pickers. They're so high. Cranes, huge cranes are helping people on and off. Huge schools of people dancing. It's an absolutely colorful and spectacular event to see. The tricky part is that you need to know ahead of time how to access those events. And so that's one big word to the wise that I would give people. If you are going to go to Carnival, make sure to hit the tourist office because they're the people that can really help you access those events. I think that if you go to Salvador is a place where most of the Brazilians actually are going to Carnival, and that is more of a street experience, and you can see some things just right in the street as you're going down, and lots of wonderful decorations all over. The energy level, of course, is crazy, and you have to definitely be on your toes because that's the time if there are going to be pickpockets, etc., coming out that you may be a target due to your white skin color, if that's the color skin that you have. So you just you have to be aware.
Yeah, just be mindfully cautious. Well, exactly. I can certainly appreciate, it's been a wonderful opportunity to speak with both of you and your son, Christopher. Again, the book is Bring Your Own Children, South America, a Family Sabbatical Handbook. And it literally is not just the story unfolding about your experiences, but it literally is a travel handbook that people can use for plenty of resources so they can help plan and even take it with them so they can, they said to do this. Oh, look at that. It just kind of panned out. And there is the ATM, and then it did get filled on this particular day, so we're good to go. Mm-hmm. Well, Robin, we'd like to thank you and Christopher for sharing your time and your experience with us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience in closing?
Well, I would just like to encourage everybody to to really consider South America, the diversity, et cetera, and to think about the fact that it really is something different than perhaps what our perceptions of it being a dangerous and dirty and scary place. It's really, there are so many benefits to it and so many different places that you can go that you'll have a perhaps European experience, an Andean experience, ruins, animals. There's lots to do down there.
Very good. Well, Robin, again, thank you for joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program, and you too, Christopher.
Thank you very much.
You get. Again, the book is Bring Your Own Children, South America, a Family Sabbatical Handbook, and we'll have that posted on our website, especially in our newsletter, and we'll have a brief on that. Be sure to join us there at our website, beyond50radio.com. That is 50 with a 50, the number 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in today, and remember, live your day past halfway.